just a few days ago because I wanted to swap ideas about climate change. So I've been trying to figure it out for a while now. And here I am. I had always imagined maybe doing something like this after the end of a period of intense and thorough research. This is maybe more the beginning. What I'm going to give you today, I think, is a coherent big picture. And for those of you who've researched the issue before, I don't think it's going to be all that different from what you may already know. Though there may be ideas that are different than what you've heard about what we should do. But there's still a lot of detail to be filled in. So with that, I'm going to get started. I am an engineer and formerly researcher by trade. I don't do sermons often. So where do research and engineering talks start? They start with the problem. Right? There's always got to be a problem, otherwise we wouldn't be doing anything. So here, fortunately, we certainly do have a problem. We have climate change. We have global warming. Right? And I've looked at the evidence for the problem, and there are two contentions. One is that the world is warming up, and the other is that human activity is causing it. And the consensus among scientists is that both of these things are true. I've looked at a lot of the evidence myself. I won't tell you, because it wouldn't be honest, that I understand every last bit of that evidence. I see plenty of arguments going in both directions. But based on what I've read so far, and even digging into some of the skeptics' websites and their articles, right, I see two things. I see a body of scientists having a healthy scientific debate on certain details, and a pretty overwhelming consensus that both of those things are true. The world's warming up, and we are causing it. And then I see legitimate questions being asked about this or that part of certain models. And then I see, on skeptic websites, I see forums, and I see amateurs, and I see people being very loud, and nothing like the intelligent and thoughtful debate that is going on in one place. In that other place, what I see seems more like hysterics and outright conspiracy theories. I'll be looking into a lot of that some more in order to verify that, but it's pretty hard for me to escape that conclusion right now. And I think in order to believe that the consensus is somehow wrong, you have to be a pretty determined conspiracy theorist. A lot of people would have to be wrong, and this huge conspiracy would have to be perpetrated on the public by scientists who want to secure their research funding, presumably because they like to do things like camp out in Antarctica and drill ice core samples just for the fun of it. So there's two graphs that kind of sum it all up. Right? And they're actually simple enough to just kind of draw them. Right? Temperature over time, right? We got year 1000, year 1900, right? Long time ago, going like this, 1900, going like that, right? You can find lots of graphs from lots of different sources. They all look like that. You look at graphs of carbon emissions, they're doing pretty much the same thing. If you look back in the past, there are times, if you go way, way back, where we've been warmer. But those times have not been times when humans were around. And had we been around, look at the consequences of that may well have just been as catastrophic as some of the consequences we are looking at now. The other graph is nice because it kind of sums up all of the skepticism all in one shot, right? If you look at the skepticism, there are alternative hypotheses, alternative reasons. Like pretty much everyone agrees at this point that it's warming, and evidence continues to accumulate. People are not so sure if it's human beings causing it. There may be people in this room, I wouldn't be surprised after all the conversations I've had with different people about this, that are not sure that what human beings are doing is the direct cause of the warming that we're seeing right now. And it's a responsible question to ask. Now, there are alternative hypotheses you might have heard of, like solar activity, increases in the amount of radiation coming from the sun, theories having to do with cosmic rays influencing cloud formation. I won't get into all that all now. There is not time to dig into all of that, and I don't understand a lot of it still. What I do understand is that, again, going back to the places where the calm, rational debate is happening, people do not dismiss those theories. They look at them pretty carefully. Right? And so here is the one graph. If you look at temperature over time, now we're looking at, everybody see this, by the way?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Yeah. What's blocking you, the podium? Okay. Yeah.
You won't hear it.
I'm not mic'd. I'll be very loud. This won't take very long. Oh, this. Okay, can you hear me if I just talk like this? Okay, this part will only last a second. Okay. Year 1900, that's a 9, I promise. Year 2000. Okay. When you look at all of the possible causes of climate change and really seriously look at them and analyze them, there is a range of temperatures that we would expect from 1900 to 2000. Not a certainty of what the temperature would be, but a range where we would expect it to fall. And that range looks like this. If we take into account only natural factors, if we cut carbon emissions caused by humans out of the equation, we would expect something in this range. If we add human activity into the equation, the range we would expect looks like that. Okay, so we're here already in the year 2000 at the point where we've got enough divergence. Right? So where are the actual temperatures? The actual temperatures look something like that. All right, so all in one, you don't have to understand all of the theories yourself. You can know that a lot of very bright people who spend their life doing this have looked at all of the theories, and they say, if an alternate theory were true, we'd be here. Okay? If human beings are causing global warming, we would be here, and here, in fact, is where we are. So much for the infographic portion of the presentation. Move on from what's happening and why to, well, what do we do about it? And I think everybody in this room has a pretty strong sense we should do something about this. And I've looked at lots of websites and articles and the suggestions, and they all look about the same to me. You get through this part of the presentation with the graphs and the charts and the proof, and then you get to change your light bulbs, buy more energy efficient appliances, buy an electric car. Now I see websites saying, go one day without meat. Meat, turns out, is carbon intensive. Now I imagine a company, and I imagine a company, the CEO getting in front of the shareholders and the board with graphs like I just showed you, except instead of showing something going up, showing profits all of a sudden taking a nosedive. Right, and telling everybody, our business model is in fundamental danger, our company's about to tank. What do we do? And then turning around to the employees and saying, do one thing. Think globally, act locally. You figure out where you can save a little bit of profit here and a little bit of profit there. If I were working at that company, I'd be gone. If I owned stock in that company, I would sell. That is not a proposal that matches the problem in seriousness or in scale. I do not want to walk around feeling morally superior to everybody because I take the bus to work. I want to see that graph go down. And I want to know that we are doing things as a planet that make that graph go down. We are not doing that now. So, what exactly do we do? We go from think globally, act locally, what do we do as individuals, to what can we do as a planet policy-wise? What's a strategy? What is a set of policies that can guide our actions towards something that will have a visible result and make the graph go down? The main thing that I'm going to talk about here is a sort of economic analysis of the problem. And I need to begin, oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not going to talk about policy yet. Before I talk about policy, I need to talk about technology. Wherever it is that we're going, technology is going to reshape our lives, change things in unimaginable ways, whatever we do. Right? To give you an example of how hard it is to think about where technology is going to take us and where innovation is going to take us, right? Imagine how our lives now appear to somebody 100 years in the past. Right? And I won't even go through all of the examples. I'm sure you can think of it on your own. Look at what's coming now. To give you one example, my employer, Google, is developing a self-driving car, right? And when I sit back and I just think about, oh, cool, I'd like to have a self-driving car, and I might imagine myself, sitting there reading the newspaper as it drives me to work, right? And that's the only thing embedded in my life that changes, right? No, self-driving cars change a ton of things about the entire way society works. Self-driving cars mean that blind people and the elderly and people with disabilities can get around on their own. And 10-year-old kids can go to the mall by themselves. And I might not even own a car. There could just be a roving fleet of cars driving themselves around or parked nearby, and I could step outside my doorway and press a button, and a car comes and picks me up and takes me where I need to go. And while I'm driving there, they can drive a few feet apart going 100 miles an hour because they can do that. And they can brake faster than we can if there's danger. And this may all be coming, or it may look entirely different, but the changes are going to be big. It's not just going to be the Chevy Monte Carlo sitting in my driveway right now, taking me to work while I read. Now, technology does help us reduce carbon emissions. We see things like more efficient light bulbs. We see ways to save energy as a result of innovation. But the results of that can also be unpredictable and counterintuitive. I read an article talking about LED lights. LED lights are fabulous. They cost, for the cost, they last many, many times the length of regular light bulbs. Right? And there's no question in my mind, we are moving to a future where there are many more LED lights than there are now. And the light is nicer than compact fluorescence, all of that. But I looked at an economic analysis of where we might be going with that. What if we suddenly have that kind of lighting available so cheaply? We may well use more energy for lighting and not less. If it's possible, there are plenty of people who would say, well, I couldn't light my parking lot all night at daylight levels before, but now I can, so I'm going to. Right? We may see a lot of that. So we cannot rely on technology by itself to take us where we want to go. Technology needs a guiding force. Innovation needs incentives. People need to know the big brains that are working on stuff are guided, to put it bluntly, to where the money is. Right? These are the problems that companies will try to solve. And this is what guides what technologies get developed and the ways in which they are deployed. So now I'm ready to talk about policy. Right? In this unimaginable future, and I should emphasize that I talked about a future that might be unimaginable. Most people agree we already have the technology today to get where we need to be in terms of CO2 emissions. But we've seen that disparity between where we could be, based on technology we already have, and where we are, because the incentives are not right. So what do we do? Now the economists, I'll lay a little bit of economics jargon on you, and I promise that it'll be worth it. There's one key idea that it's important to understand in all of that, and that idea is called an externality. So in a market, I'm making things, I'm selling, you're buying things, and it costs me something to make them, right? Labor, materials I have to buy, whatever, right? And it's worth something to you, and that worth might be subjective, and it might be different for everybody, but you and I will agree on a price. We'll both voluntarily make this exchange where you give me money and I give you whatever it is you're buying from me, right? And that benefits both of us. Kind of the foundation of modern economics. So what could go wrong? Well, what could go wrong is, what if there's some result of that transaction, some byproduct, that doesn't actually affect either you or me, right? So I pollute the air when I'm making that product. It doesn't affect the price that you're willing to pay, or the price that I'm willing to sell that product at, or the amount that you're willing to buy, or the amount that I'm willing to sell, because neither of us directly pays that price. Everybody else does. And that's what an externality is. That's why the word external. It's not the people involved in the transaction paying the price, it's other people. Okay, so when economists look at this problem, they don't really look at it as, say, a moral problem of consumers or companies being bad. There's almost this kind of, it's all of a sudden all of this moral clutter is cleared. And from the economist's perspective, it's no, people are missing information. They don't even think of it in terms of a punishment. They need to be priced. They need to have these punitive payments that they make because they're damaging the environment. It's no, they're actually being deprived of information by not having to pay. They can't adjust because they don't have the signal. That's what the economists call that, is a signal. So all of the policies, and some of them get quite complicated and counterintuitive, and we'll see just how counterintuitive. But the basic idea, the reason the policies make sense is because they directly address that problem. They say, we have to make sure that whoever is polluting has to pay for it. And that's a signal that they need in order to adjust their behavior. So there are two leading proposals for how to address this problem. They've both been implemented in different places. One is called cap and trade, and the other is called a carbon tax. I'll describe them briefly. The differences between them, they both have their pros and cons. It's much more important to understand the core concept and agree that we do one or the other in order to impose a cost than it is to, say, choose one or the other. But briefly, a cap and trade scheme means we say, here's the total amount of carbon that we want to emit, no more than this. And we create permits to emit a certain amount of carbon, and then we sell them. And we allow companies to exchange them at whatever prices they want. So the way this would play out in practice is, this company over here emits a lot of carbon. They have to buy a lot of permits in order to do that. They don't like buying those permits. They might look for ways that they can reduce their carbon emissions and still satisfy their customers. And so they would come up with innovations that reduce their emissions. Then they would have extra permits on hand to sell. They would make money. So that's the incentive. Or they might say, well, there's nothing we can do about this, and part of what we're going to have to do is pass the cost on to consumers. Now, this is an important point, because I know sometimes when we talk about this kind of policy, we grumble about, well, the costs just get passed on to consumers. The companies who are causing these problems don't actually have to pay. It is very important that the cost gets passed on to consumers. Companies only make things because people want them. Adjusting the behavior of all of us, of the consumers, is the goal. It's fundamental. This is not a problem caused by big companies. This is a problem caused by all of us. Okay? So that's cap and trade. Another way to do it is a carbon tax, where we just say, forget the permits and the market and the trading. We're just going to measure what everybody emits, which we have to do in both schemes. And we're just going to say, okay, the rate per ton of carbon emitted is this, right? And you pay. There again, companies have the same set of incentives. They can either look for innovations to cut their emissions, or they can pay the cost and perhaps pass it on to consumers. Now, the pros and cons of those policies, right? Obama was proposing cap and trade. That's the favorite scheme here, because anything with the word tax in it is very hard to do politically in our country. A tax turns out to be politically simpler. Once it's implemented, there is less room for special interests to get in and try to get themselves favors. If you have a cap and trade scheme, then you have a lot of hard decisions to make, like who gets how many permits initially. The best way to do it is to auction them off. But in practice, that's not what happened in Europe because they caved under the political pressure. Instead, they gave out a lot of permits. They ended up giving away more permits than they should have. And now the price of polluting is not as high as it needs to be in order to effect the change that they want. So these are the leading proposals. Now it gets way, way more complicated than that because it's not just a national problem, it's a global problem. And it's not just the US that has to do something. We've got a whole world out there that hasn't industrialized yet and who's going to start pumping out carbon emissions, right? We're going to have a system of border taxes where we don't allow people to just buy stuff from other countries because they're outside the US and no longer subject to our regulations. So it gets complicated, but the key idea is this externality idea. If we don't have incentives in place, people won't change their behaviors. Now, a brief tour of other kinds of policies that don't work. And this is really important because some very well-meaning people propose these policies and they're disastrous, right? One is, which one to do first? Yeah, one is subsidy, right? Where we give money to people who we think are developing technologies or producing things that emit less, right? Corn ethanol, excellent example of subsidy gone terribly wrong in this country. Corn ethanol is not making any dent in our carbon emissions. The subsidy is causing farmers to grow corn for ethanol instead of for food, which is putting pressure on food prices. Disastrous policy. There is a similar policy in Spain having to do with solar panels, which did nothing except create this huge bubble in a market for solar panels around this one deadline, and then the market crashed and jobs were lost. So the government trying to pick the technological winners, right, in such a complicated world where there's so many different competing ideas, in theory and in practice, has turned out to be bad. Better to just say, our goal is to cap the emissions. Let's have a policy that focuses on that directly. Let's give the market the freedom to figure out who should emit, who shouldn't, how much each person emits, and the market's good at figuring out what's the best way forward. Now, I know there's going to be some reaction to this idea of kind of turning the problem into one of economics and money. And that might seem a little bit at odds to the way we want to think about spirituality and being connected with the planet and actually doing something about the problem. And my response to that is, right, I do all of the things that you do. I ride the bus to work, I try to save energy where I can. I'm not going to stop doing those things. But I'm overwhelmed, right? And I got to save for retirement. I got to save for college. I got to keep my lawn from being weedy. I got to, right? It takes a lot of time, right? I got to be present in the here and now. We can't all be climate change experts. If the cost to the world, to the environment, to our fellow humans, is all embodied in the monetary cost of the goods that I buy, that gives me an easy way to do what I want, which is to live rightly. Right? It turns a really complicated problem into a really easy problem. And it also allows me to do some things that might harm the environment a little bit, and I decide that that's worth it. But I know, because based on the price, exactly how much damage I'm doing. And I can have some peace of mind that, well, that's somehow paid for, and that the overall level is not going to get too bad while I do that. And if too many people decide to do as I'm doing, the price will go up and will stop. That's a world where that's where I want to be, where I don't have to feel like I'm perpetually confused by all of this stuff, and I can just make decisions and live my life and live rightly. Now, in danger of we're going way over time here. So, two things I want to leave you with. Where do we go from here? A lot of what our leaders say, the leaders who are in favor of doing something about this, is that we all know what we need to do, but we lack the political will. In a democracy, we lack the political will. Does not mean that our leaders are not good enough. It means that the population is not yet convinced that this is what we need to do. In order to enact policies that are as complicated as what I just explained, and as costly as what I just explained, they are costly, we need overwhelming public support for this sort of thing. And if you look at where public opinion is in this country, it is not there. What can we do? I think what this group of people can do, maybe better, and maybe more so than any other group. Here we have a group of people who have committed themselves to a responsible search for truth, who have taken science as a source, and who have committed themselves to respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all part. I can't imagine a better group of people to go out, to learn about what we need to do and why, and to talk to people. I bet you know somebody who respects you, who would listen to your opinion, who doesn't know where they are yet on this issue. Right? And if they heard it from you, right? They've heard it already from Al Gore, right? They might not believe Al Gore. Al Gore is a politician. You are their trusted friend. This is what I think we need to be doing as a group in order to impact this issue. The last thing that I want to leave you with, it's tempting to end on an optimistic note, and say, go get it, we're going to solve it together. I am not that optimistic about that problem, about this problem. To be perfectly honest, we may not solve this problem. Right? It's been going in a pretty bad direction for a while. All indications are it's going to get worse. But it's not healthy for us to walk around feeling that weight of the entire world, literally, on our shoulders, each and every one of us individually. It's not going to be productive. There are plenty of things I think you can think about that look like overwhelming tasks where we might have succeeded, we might have failed. But even overwhelming odds of failure do not justify sitting back and not trying. What do we say to future generations if we fail? I'll be a lot happier telling future generations I tried than I decided we were going to fail, and so I just did nothing. I'm going to have to be ready to fight this over the long term. Not to tell my kids, hey, we solved it for you, but hey, I did the best I could. Now it's your turn. I have to approach this task with equal parts determination and humility.